Welcome in, everyone, to episode 9 of Southern Rivals Football Show. I am your co-host, Harrison Brooks, the Gamecock fan that's continuing to keep swinging here just through this abysmal season. But hopefully we'll get some more wins coming up. Joined by my talented, lucky as all get out, and I don't know, borderline genius master picker over here. Clemson fan, Adam McNeil. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing, well, I don't want to ever lie, so I don't want to say I'm doing well, because I don't think I'm doing well. I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay.
Yeah. We gotta find the bright sides to everything. Right now.
And to make note real quick, I like the clean shaven Harrison we're seeing today.
Really. See, I
dig it. I dig it.
I don't. Yeah.
TBT see, back in the Citadel days.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, and I'm not the biggest fan back in those days. I also think back now that I'm clean shaven, I look back at my pictures, and I was a twig back in college. And
Me too.
I'm now like a healthy weight. And at first my wife was like, I was telling my wife, I was like, God, I feel like I'm fat now. She's like, no, you're not fat. You're just healthy weight. I'm like, oh, because then I look back at my pictures. I'm like, oh God, yeah, I was. I'm actually healthy now.
I think on average, Citadel on a daily basis, I probably consumed maybe 1,000 calories. If you think about it, during the week, maybe 1,000 calories a day, especially during knob year, but we're burning like 3,000 and trying to recuperate on the weekends.
Is the amount. Yeah, the amount that we were burning.
Oh my god!
The fact that on average we were probably getting like 4 hours of sleep every night, and yeah, we were not healthy people. Let's just say that.
We thought we were healthy, and we were far from it.
No, we were just surviving, just like everybody else. It's a little diet there. Just pain, sweat, and tears.
Sounds about right.
Alrighty. But speaking of pain, sweat, and tears, our home team, our home teams, all three of them, are continuing on their nightmare debacle trend this year.
Yes.
And I even joked with you before we get into the big games. But I even joked with you that, maybe South Carolina and Clemson at this point need to just combine teams and just try to put a full respectable team together out in the field right now, because both teams is just it's just like, as fans, we're just like what are we doing? Like, what is this? Yeah. Like, what is going on? So, and I mean, Citadel, no shock there. They also dropped another big one to Samford. But yeah, our big game breakdowns, we're going to change it up a little bit. Usually we always just do the breakdowns of the ones we previewed last week, because we had some pretty big upsets this past weekend.
Oh yeah,
we're going to dive into those a little bit more.
At Kenneth Martin.
Yeah, sorry, Kenneth. And then we'll just touch on the fact that Oregon and Louisville destroyed their respective teams. But yeah, we'll do Georgia, Florida. Great game that was.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina, Georgia Tech. Again, sorry, Kenneth.
Too.
Yeah. And then Oklahoma, Kansas.
Wow.
Man, did not see that one coming.
That one flew under our radar, and I don't know how.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just the fact that everyone's still just thinking about how Kansas hasn't been a respectable football team in many years. And just, I mean, looking back at the game and stuff itself, Oklahoma did themselves no favors in the game. But yeah, just hats off to Kansas. I know they stormed the field and everything for that game, rightfully so. But yeah, huge game. But we'll get into that later on too. And again, home team breakdown: South Carolina, Texas A&M, Clemson, NC State, and we'll touch on the Citadel dropping another goose egg to Samford. But yep, if there's nothing else, I would get it started off with a pretty interesting wild stat.
Hit us with it.
First one, yeah. This one is about Nick Saban, which would be great because our part two, we have one of the best rivalry games of the entire nation coming up with LSU and Alabama.
Yep.
This I have to say real quick about the slate for next weekend or this coming weekend, Week 10.
Oh.
We got some games. It's going to be great.
And it's the first
It's going to be
weekend with
great. South Carolina
the college football playoff rankings too.
It is, yes. And I think what we're going to try to do for our part 2 is release it at least after the fact that the college football playoff, because I think it's this week, isn't it?
It's
that the rankings
Tuesday
come out.
evening. Yeah, Tuesday evening.
Yeah. So we'll make that our college football playoff topic. Just the fact that it'll be the first time the rankings come out. We'll dive into those. We'll see where I'm interested to see where Georgia's going to fall. Because a part of me thinks they could be number one. A part of me thinks that they're not going to be. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to break all that down where people are. But yeah, back to the wild stat. This one's about Nick Saban. Really interesting here. Nick Saban has more 10-win seasons in the last 15 years than Auburn has in their entire program history.
That's wild.
Sorry to any Auburn fans out there listening, but
wow,
that's incredible. So the number, I mean, essentially last 15 years, Nick Saban's had at least 10 wins, every single one of them, 15. And Auburn in the entire history has only had 14 10-win seasons. Just
wow,
incredible. You talk about a dynasty. I mean, people have talked about it before. I am not sure we're ever going to see the likes of a dynasty like this again with Alabama. And I say that just because of how dominant they were last 15 seasons. Their off years are like 10 wins.
Yeah.
That's when they're down, is when they have 10
Yeah.
wins. As opposed to other teams, that's like a ceiling, you know. Like South Carolina, our ceiling was 11 wins that we had for like 3 seasons. So it's wild to know that's, you know, they get a 10-win season. And everybody's like, man, like that sucked. You're like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? So yeah, just incredible. But yeah, we'll get it kicked off with some brief mentions. Again, these are the ones that weren't much of games, but number 8 Oregon absolutely throttles number 13 Utah, and absolutely a game that I didn't see unfolding the way that it did. But they ended up winning 35-6. Utah didn't even get a touchdown, and yeah, just absolute domination. Hats off to Oregon. I really thought Utah's home field advantage was going to be able to play more of a factor than it did. But I mean, when you watch the game back and the highlights and everything, it just goes to show that Oregon has just so much more speed than Utah. They were able to do anything they wanted at will. And so it's just, yeah, hats off to them. And that even makes me think more, too, that because of the fact that Utah pulled off such a close win against Southern Cal, how bad Southern Cal is.
Exactly.
I'll just say that. And how far that gap is between Oregon and Southern Cal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it definitely is one of those things that in the Pac-12, it's Washington, Oregon, and everybody else.
Exactly.
Not to say that the other teams are not to say the other teams are just really bad, but it's just the gap is so much bigger.
Right.
Just like in the past, you'll have like it used to be one of those things was SEC. It was like Alabama, LSU, everybody else. It was one of those things back in, you know, that like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, things like that. That gap was just so huge. So yeah, that was the first debacle of a pick that I went out on the limb to say Utah was going to win. That was the first one, and then the second one, number 18 Louisville shuts out number 20 Duke, 23-0. And
that was surprising to an extent.
I have to say that, yeah, and I have to say that now that I see the score, look back at the game and everything, I'm like, you know, I should have seen at least some of it coming because of the fact. I think the fact that Louisville had a week off is where I kind of forgot about how good they looked when they played.
Yep.
and how good that running back is. Jawar Jordan is for Louisville. Absolute just blur. Highlight reel every time he touches the ball. And then it also, I've seen tweets and everything all about Duke, and it's just the fact that banged up Riley Leonard is just not the same as
Mm-mm.
healthy Riley Leonard. And that's just the biggest shame of it all is that ever since he got injured, that offense just does not look the same whatsoever, and has really kept them out of games, and especially in this one, like they just could never get any rhythm going, couldn't get anything going whatsoever. Credit though to Louisville's defense; they've been stingy and one of the better pass rushing defenses in the nation so far. But also, I mean, that offense, they don't even really need to throw it all around the yard very much. When you have a running back like they do with Gerard Jordan, just absolute electric. And because of that win that Louisville had, we'll talk about it too with North Carolina, Georgia Tech, but that now kind of puts Louisville in the driver's seat
Mm-hmm.
to punch their ticket to the ACC championship against
Yep.
Florida State. As long as they don't falter, which North Carolina definitely don't take any advice from North Carolina on not
Oh.
faltering because it's just man, my heart breaks for them because we'll talk about it in a little bit. It's just it sucks. It sucks for North Carolina because they have so much talent, and
Yeah.
the fact that they've twice in a row um, fallen to a team that they should have beaten, it's just it stinks. But
Yeah, and with this
and then
Duke
the
team,
last big
I
upset.
was yeah with this
Go ahead.
Duke team, man. I was really we talked about this last week with Riley Leonard specifically. I was shocked that he played. I feel like
Yeah,
with Duke
yeah,
right now, they're in a sense where they're kind of almost panicking a little bit with the loss to Florida State and knew this game against Louisville was a must win. Like, hey, we got to have Riley Leonard out there. But you're forcing him out there on an ankle sprain that's not really fully recovered, probably not even 75% recovered. And you see the results. He went 9 for 23 passing, 121 yards, averaging 5.3 yards of completion, no touchdowns and interception. It's like, man, are you just better off with sitting him, let him heal for the games you got down the stretch and play the backup? I'm not saying you got to lean on the backup, but a 100% healthy backup is better than a very banged up starter. I don't care who you are, unless you're just a huge drop
exactly.
off between the starter and backup. But yeah, man, I just kind of feel like with that loss with Duke last night, I don't want to say it was necessarily self-inflicted with when it comes to the decision making on just kind of starting your really banged up quarterback, but it to me it seems like they were kind of panicking when they really didn't need to.
Right. Yeah, I was very surprised that they went with him to start the game instead of their backup. Because, like I said, and that was one thing that I felt at least reasonably good about picking Duke in the game is that we've seen their backup play against NC State,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't. I mean, he was very efficient. He wasn't the type that was taking too many risks that were going to self-inflict or self-destruct the team or anything. And I mean, he looked pretty decent. So I felt at least good that they could get things rolling, rely more on the run game, pass it whenever they creep up the defense and everything. But yeah, it's just I think they were reaching a little bit too much and being a little bit too optimistic in playing Riley Leonard,
Yeah.
and it's just unfortunate. It really is. Not really to say that if the backup would have started over him, if that would have led Duke to win, because even so, looking at how good Louisville played and being reminded how much talent they have with that running back position, the defense, honestly, Louisville probably still would have pulled it out, but it would have been a lot closer, and it would have been more of a game, been more respectable than just 23 to nothing. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, very unfortunate,
Yeah.
in that game. And then the last stunner, which I also did not see coming, is Arizona stunning number 11 Oregon State 27-24.
That was
A
crazy.
heartbreaker. Yeah, heartbreaker for Oregon State. They've had a tremendous season up until this point. Was creeping into the Pac-12 discussion, challenging for the championship. So yeah, just heartbreaks for them. Um, very very close game. Arizona has always, from what I understand, out in the Pac-12, has always been that type that's kind of a giant killer role. They won't really consistently stay ranked, but whenever they play high-ranking teams, it just seems like they just know how to rally together and play some of their best football in those moments. So yeah, definitely wouldn't be surprised if Arizona gets ranked after that win. So yeah, same can be said for Georgia Tech and Kansas. Would not be surprised if they get ranked for those other upsets that we'll mention a little bit. But let me start it off with the first big breakdown, the heavyweight match of number 1 Georgia at Florida. Georgia won this game 43-20, and I have to say, after this game, I am more impressed with Georgia than I probably previously was, because of the fact they were able to put up almost 500 yards of total offense, and they didn't have Brock Bowers. And going back and looking at the game, it just seems to me like it was on display for Georgia how much speed they had. And it seemed like every time that they were passing the ball, it was a big play. It wasn't like these little dink and dunk little passes here and there and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It always just seemed like it was mid to deep throw passes that the wide receivers were excellent on finding open routes or open spaces and turning just a regular, 10, 15-yard gain into 30, 40 yards, something like that. And they just seemed like they were, against this Florida defense that's been pretty solid throughout the season. They almost kind of did what they wanted at will, especially passing. Finished the game 315 yards total passing. Yards per pass average 11.3. So that goes to show, like I said, just every time they were passing, you just knew it was at least going to be about 10 yards first
Beyond
down.
the sticks every time.
And then rushing, they finished 171 yards, 4.5 rush average. Penalties, both teams were pretty even. Only 2 penalties. They didn't really destroy themselves really in any regard. Florida had the one turnover, which was a fumble lost. So for the most part, a clean game. It'd have been one thing if you were looking at this and saying, "Oh, Florida had like 5 turnovers." You're like, "Oh, well, that's probably why Georgia won this way." No, it wasn't really a dirty game. It was just Georgia just put on the burners with a lot of their players and really showed out. Very impressed with Carson Beck. I feel like he's just getting better and at the right time. This entire Georgia team, especially the offense, it just seems like they're hitting their stride at the right time. And we talked about it before because they're going into their toughest stretch of the season upcoming with Missouri, followed by Ole Miss, and then on the road to Tennessee. And that Tennessee team, I talked about it last week. They were going to have a tough game against Kentucky, and they sure did, but they pulled it out.
Yep.
And so Tennessee is still keeping their SEC hopes, SEC East hopes alive. And it's really going to hinge on that Georgia-Tennessee matchup, as long as Tennessee can not stumble up until then.
Yep.
But yeah, Carson Beck finished with 315 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 19 for 28. Graham Mertz, I mean, he was probably the best part of Florida's offense. 25 for 34, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions as well. It was just the fact that Georgia made big plays whenever they needed to, and Florida just didn't. It just really came down to that. And that just kind of goes back to a Georgia defense that doesn't have to rely on turnovers, doesn't have to rely on the other offense shooting themselves in the foot. That the defense they just have dudes, and they're fundamentally sound. That's what it tells me more than anything, is that Georgia defense is fundamentally sound. And let's see, as far as the studs for Georgia's offense, Dijon Edwards, 96 yards, 2 touchdowns, 15 carries. That guy, every time I watch him, he just looks like a very smooth running back. He's not super fast. He's not super strong either. And he doesn't have like a freakish height weight advantage or anything like that. But his vision has just been the most impressive thing for Georgia that I've seen so far this season. Kind of like an underrated running back, I'd say. Of all the running backs that Georgia's usually produced, definitely an underrated guy. But man, he has a nose for getting good yardage and getting touchdowns. So they definitely have a guy that they've kind of stolen, I guess, on the radar with Georgia's running backs. Lad McConkey, he is also he
He's
kind of reminds
incredible.
me kind of like a Hunter Renfro,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
that that white dude that's just super elusive, very good at getting open space, and just so
Sure-handed.
sure-handed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
Jinx me.
he is their version of Hunter Renfro, and finished the game 6 receptions, 135 yards, 1 touchdown, a long at 54. And then also another guy, Dominic Lovett, who was the Missouri transfer, one of the top wide receivers in the transfer portal last year, finished the game 83 yards, also a 55 yard long reception. So yeah, just they spread it out to a lot of different people in the passing game. And yeah, just more than anything, just impressed with the way that Georgia was able to overcome the Brock Bowers injury. Oscar Delp, he only had 2 receptions. One of them was incredible. I don't know if you got to see it. It was
Mm-hmm.
near the beginning of the game. He caught it like one-handed,
Yeah.
kind of behind his back. It was one of those plays that you saw that and you're like, oh, they're gonna be fine. Okay,
Yeah.
they'll be all right. He's not Brock Bowers, but he's talented. So yeah. What other thoughts do you have on this impressive win?
I'm genuinely kind of surprised at how quickly it became a little lopsided. And I said last week
Yeah,
during our show that obviously we thought that Georgia would win and cover the spread, but I was under the impression that it would be a pretty close game up until about the fourth quarter, maybe even midway through the third quarter. And then Kirby Smart would remind us all about what Georgia's all about, in which he did, but he began that triumph earlier on in the game than I expected. Uh, this Georgia team, man, very impressive, and I think Kirby Smart definitely had his guys primed and ready to go, saying, "Hey, everyone's counting you guys out coming into this week. Everyone's counting y'all out. Remind the country who Georgia is." And that's what they did.
yeah,
Because I think there's been a
absolutely.
lot of talk and a lot of arguing about, is Georgia really the number one team in the country? Is it Michigan? Is it Florida State? Is it Ohio State? So, we touched on it a little bit earlier. I think with the dominant performance they showed yesterday, I think they will be number one in the playoff rankings. Someone put it
Yeah,
pretty nicely. I thought they said, in order to be the man, you got to beat the man. In other
yeah,
words, no one
it's
else
true.
is going to be number one until someone takes down number one. So I would expect Georgia to be number one in this upcoming playoff rankings. And as we've talked about, they've got some pretty good ones coming up. I said this last week. I still stand by it. They're due for an upset. I knew it wasn't going to come against Florida, but I think it's going to come in these next 3 weeks. I truly do. Which one is it going to be? I'm leaning more towards Tennessee, but right now this Georgia team is starting to, I think, really gain a very good rhythm, though, going into a very critical, for them at least, next 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah, a very critical stretch. Absolutely. Um, Something I do want to touch on with this game that I know Florida fans would love, would probably not love to reminisce, but love to argue about, and that is in the game. It was second half. There was a time where Florida got it to 4th and inches, and for some reason they decided to do a trickeration play instead of just doing a QB sneak. And so, if anyone hasn't seen this, I would try to look it up. Just have your thoughts on it because I've never seen something like this before. And I think it was just a case of overthinking it. So they line up just like traditional I formation, one running back in the backfield, and Graham Mertz goes up to the line and he kind of leans over the center and almost kind of does like a hard count, and then the center snaps the ball through Graham Mertz's legs. It was all on purpose to the running back, and then the running back was supposed to run up to the line, and it didn't fool Georgia whatsoever. They
Wow.
had a linebacker or defensive end on that running back immediately, and even though he tried to fight and get some yardage, he ended up losing, I think, 3 yards. And you look back on it and you're like, it was 4th and inches. All you had to
Exactly.
do was sneak it, and that was a turning point in the game that a lot of momentum just kind of just deflated from Florida. And yeah, I feel bad for Florida fans just because watching that. I feel like I've been there a ton of times with South Carolina, and especially last year, with bonehead decisions on offense and trickeration and exotic plays that you're just like, what are we doing? We're overthinking this. Just be
Yeah,
simple.
just keep it simple.
And yeah, just keep it simple. As people have already been seeing about the NFL with the Eagles, they do like they call it the brotherly shove, where
Mm-hmm.
they just get the quarterback lined up, and then they have three people behind him, and then they just shove him and push him. Like that's all you need to do, or something,
Exactly.
just something similar to that, just something similar. So yeah, a frustrating moment for Florida, but yeah, a very good win. I'll say overall for Georgia, very impressive that they looked that good. So all right, Kenneth, I'm sorry, but we're gonna get into this
Oh,
North Carolina, Florida,
poor
Georgia Tech.
Martin.
Yeah, yeah. What a well, honestly, you called this last week
I
that
did.
you said of
I
all
did.
the upset potential teams, um, that North Carolina and Georgia Tech was going to be a potential upset because it was a night game in Georgia Tech,
Yep.
and
Homecoming in Atlanta.
Georgia Tech just has this habit of um, playing top like higher ranked teams in Atlanta and just giving them fits.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people are forgetting how this Georgia Tech team is just they are definitely a far cry from the triple option. They are not the triple option anymore,
No.
and it took years to get players transitioned and recruited out of that triple option
Yep.
set because I mean that entire roster was set for triple option. It was going to take a few years to get players in that are just not that anymore. And with Haynes King at the helm for Georgia Tech, I mean, they look dynamic, and
Yeah.
that offense can really strike at any time. So, yeah, hats off to Georgia Tech. They ended up winning the game 46-42. And other than that, I will turn it over to you for more of the breakdown.
Holy cow, man. I mean, so yeah, to carry off what you said, I've always said that Georgia Tech has, in recent years, I say recent years, but like kind of date back to like 2011, for example, when Clemson went in there. I think at the time they were undefeated and number 5, I believe, in the BCS poll at the time. Went in there and got their tails handed to them. Lost Georgia Tech. Lost there again 2014 there with Deshaun Watson. In recent years, you look at Florida State. Georgia Tech blocks the field goal, returns it for a touchdown, upsets Florida State in Atlanta. I mean, it's always been kind of a night game in Atlanta is when Georgia Tech has always pulled out some sort of trickery or something out of their sleeve and pulls off an upset. And so when I saw this game, especially North Carolina losing to Virginia last week, I just kind of had a feeling, okay, the Georgia Tech team came off of a shocking win at Miami. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and watching their games this year, they're a very different Georgia Tech team compared to the recent years. They've been very down, and they're
Yeah,
kind of rebuilding now with the new head coach and all that, and obviously with the transfer quarterback or transfer portal quarterback Haynes King from Texas A&M. That dude is, again, it's kind of one of the success stories of where if you need to plug a hole, you can go to the portal and get immediate results. And Georgia Tech is reaping the benefits of that right now. That dude played a great game last night. Um, but this was a ton of fun to watch, honestly, and this was chaos in the ACC that I was hopeful would happen. I didn't know if it would happen or not. At this point, it doesn't matter because, as from a Clemson fan standpoint, we're not going to Charlotte. We're not going to be even close to even going there. But it just makes you wonder the what ifs if Clemson would be winning their ball games, they'd be sitting maybe number 2, number 3 in the conference, and now we're like number 11 in the conference, and we still have all the chaos happening that we needed to happen.
yeah,
Uh, but anyway, I digress. Sorry. But this Georgia Tech game, man, with North Carolina, what a great atmosphere in Atlanta. Great win by the Yellow Jackets. They're really starting to pick up some steam. They really are. And something in North Carolina, which I kind of told you a little bit last week that I kind of fear with the Tar Heels. They in recent years have had this trend where they come into seasons, pretty decently ranked. They're in maybe the top 15, and they stay in that little range for about half the season, maybe even 3/4 of the season, and then they just kind of implode. And it's just there's no really rhyme or reason to it. They just lose ball games, and they've lost 2 straight games to unranked teams. I just they might squeak in this first playoff ranking Tuesday. I don't know, um, but I'll be curious to see how that plays out. And they want to go to Charlotte. They're going to win out. I mean they're in a pretty tough spot
yeah.
now. They're in a no error zone at this point from North Carolina. But man, what a big win for the Yellow Jackets.
Yeah, and if North Carolina ends up getting ranked in the college football playoff top 25, I feel like that's solely going to be as a respectable thing for Drake May and the talent that he has. Because looking back at this game and even the Virginia game, and I'm sure all North Carolina fans will agree with me on this, the concern is growing on defense, and the
Mm-hmm.
issues aren't offense
No.
centered. It's the defense. The defense just at times just looks like they'll flash, and you'll be like, okay, that was a good stop or that was a good tackle, good play there. And then they'll turn right around and make a boneheaded, busted
Yeah.
coverage or just miss tackle, whiff on something, and you're like, what is going on? Is this the same team that just made a play a couple plays ago?
Right.
So it's just it. If I can relate as a South Carolina fan because for most of the season, South Carolina's issue has not been offense; it's been defense,
Right.
and it's just same with Drake May. I feel bad for him because this defense is kind of hampering him and forcing him and that offense to play perfect, to never miss, never make any mistakes, and it gets very tough whenever you have to go into shootouts with other teams because it's hard to play perfect games. You have mistakes. The good teams are the ones that can overcome mistakes. And yeah, I feel bad for Drake May and that offense. Same thing with Spencer Rattler. I'll get to it. I just feel bad for him. Just being hampered. They both teams would be able to shine a lot brighter if you had just a defense that was just consistent
Yep.
and was able to make stops when they supposed to and need to. But yeah, very unfortunate. I mean, even down to the very last drive that North Carolina had, Tez Walker got a good catch and then gets hit in the wrong
Rocked.
way and fumbles it,
Yeah.
and it's just heartbreaking. Like that's no one's fault. It's
Yeah.
just luck, and yeah, it sucks. It sucks for them. But Georgia Tech, I have to say, we're really going back for about Haynes King. Don't you know that Texas A&M is wishing they didn't let him go
Oh my
because
gosh.
he is playing at another level right now.
Oh yeah.
And Texas A&M, I mean, they just ever since they lost Connor Weigman, they've just been very iffy at that quarterback position with Texas A&M. So yeah, I'm sure that they're watching Haynes King tear it up at Georgia Tech, and they're like, shouldn't let him go. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
then you look at this ACC schedule now remaining from North Carolina. If they want to go to Charlotte, they got Duke at home in 2 weeks, the 11th. They go to Clemson the week after, and then they go to NC State Thanksgiving weekend.
mm,
So, I mean, you kind of see this North Carolina team the last 2 weeks, and you look at their upcoming ACC schedule. At least when they got Campbell this week, that don't really matter. If you look at their remaining ACC schedule, two of the last three on the road. I mean, none of those games are gimmies. None of them are.
no,
Even with
not at
how
all.
bad Clemson is this year on the road at Death Valley, that's not a gimme. Even on the road at NC State, in my mind, that's not a gimme. So I'm gonna be very curious how this Matt Brown version, this year at least of his Tar Heel team, how they respond after dropping the last two ACC matchups.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mac Brown, incredible coach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, hats off to him and all the jobs
Yeah.
that he's done. Texas, North Carolina. He's the if anyone can get the team rallied around and on the right track, it's him. But
Yeah.
there's just issues in that defense that are just really hampering the team from being as successful as they can be. So yeah, hats off to Georgia Tech. I'm sure they're going to be ranked. That offense for them is just getting more and more dynamic, and all led by Haynes King. Yeah, so we'll touch on a another stunning upset, probably the most stunning one of all of them this past
Yep.
weekend. Number 6 Oklahoma traveling to Kansas and Kansas winning 38-33.
My
And
goodness.
yeah, I remember the beginning of this game. It was 14-0 Kansas
Early.
before
Early.
Oklahoma even got on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just absolutely insane. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you for that one.
Yeah, this was an interesting game as well that just really kind of floated under our radar. I mean, number 6 Oklahoma, unranked Kansas. Kansas not having a bad year, obviously by any means, but even going to this game, they were 5-2. and 2-2 in conference play. And what was interesting is they went to a 14-0 lead early, and then they had like almost an hour and a half weather delay. And with those kind of delays in games, being someone who's played in those games before, it it can really alter the tempo of a game. It really depends on who
Yeah.
comes out kind of firing all cylinders after an unexpected break like that. So I was really curious to see how both teams would respond. I kind of expected Oklahoma to maybe kind of surge back and really take over that game after the weather delay. And, to be fair, they did. They scored 21 in the second quarter, and then Kansas was able to fend them off late. And one of the stats that kind of sticks out to me the most in this game is something that I always put a lot of weight into after the fact on games is third down efficiency. You've got to convert on your third downs. If you keep going off the field on 3-and-outs or whatever, you're going to have a tough time winning ball games. And Oklahoma yesterday went 2 for 10
Right.
on third downs. Kansas, not too much better. I mean, they were 4 for 14. But the other big thing is the penalties. I mean, Oklahoma, man, Brent Venables is going to rip them a new one because they got penalized 11 times compared to Kansas's 5. That ain't going to work out too well for you. And both teams with 3 turnovers in this ball game, so it was kind of a sloppy game overall. But a huge upset by the Jayhawks over Oklahoma. Again, we're kind of projecting Oklahoma to go to the Big 12 championship game for a rematch with Texas. Kansas kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in that. I think maybe temporarily. We'll kind of see.
Yeah.
You look at Oklahoma's remaining schedule here for the Big 12 wise at least. They got at Oklahoma State this weekend, West Virginia at home, at BYU, and they close out with TCU. So again, their schedule, man, ain't also it's not a give me either. So we'll see how they respond to this upset.
Yeah. It definitely feels like it feels like Oklahoma lost focus in this game,
Yeah.
and a team that they went into the hostile environment of a team that was much hungrier than they were, and definitely slept walk through the first bit of it. That's why Kansas got up 14-0, pick
Yep.
6 no less at the beginning of the game. But yeah, Kansas, they have some speed on that offense, and it's very interesting. Their offense almost looks like it kind of looks like a hybrid of a pistol West Coast with a like an option style thing thrown in there, and definitely it seems like one that's kind of hard to defend. But I have to say, even at the very end of the game, Oklahoma just looked very uninspired on defense. Even the very last touchdown, if anyone goes and watches that one, the last touchdown that Kansas scored, they like ran it in, I think from like 7 yards out, something like that. Only maybe I think one player on Oklahoma's defense tried to tackle the guy, and everyone else just kind of stood around and looked at him. And even the
Wow.
announcers were like, I need to see some more effort from these guys with the game on the line. Like I
Yeah.
just don't know what was happening. Maybe some of the players thought that it was a dead ball or something. I don't know. Sometimes that happens,
Mm.
but I'm sure, like you said, Brent Venables is he's going to light into them, and they're going to have some extra sprints for sure. Probably among other things from their practice after that game, because yeah, whenever you're fighting for a playoff spot, you can't have losses like this, and
Exactly.
especially with the Texas team that's lurking right behind you. And after this, will absolutely overtake them in the rankings. So it's just Oklahoma. You're self-destructing in that sense with that loss there. But
And it makes you kind of
yeah,
wonder: is Oklahoma? Are there more questions there than we originally thought because they barely beat UCF last weekend?
yeah, yeah, they did. And I mean, UCF, led by Gus Malzahn, also, I mean, incredible coach. You know
Yeah.
that they're going to give you your best every time they play. But yeah, you definitely would have thought that would have been a bigger margin of victory against that UCF team. Maybe that was the first step that we should have been like, maybe this isn't just a one-off
Right.
because they turn around and lose to Kansas. So yeah, they got to get refocused very quickly.
Absolutely.
Because we'll talk about it. Their next game coming up is Oklahoma State at Oklahoma State, one of the best rivalries down there in the Midwest. So yeah, so they're going to get their full attention to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State came off a humming victory against Cincinnati, and that actually leads me into the last portion here. Some stud shout outs. Oklahoma State's running back, Ollie Gordon II finished the game against Cincinnati, 25 carries, 271 yards of rushing,
Gosh.
2 touchdowns, ended the game averaging 10.8 average yards per carry. Just unreal. I don't know if Cincinnati's run defense is just that terrible. It very well could be. I know the stats are probably going to be even worse after that game, but Oklahoma better be ready and buckled up for at least the defensive wise and run defense, because it sounds like that man had the game of his life and is hitting his stride going into that rivalry game. So, yeah, Oklahoma better be ready, because Oklahoma State in the past, every time they get together, Oklahoma State plays arguably some of their best football the entire season against Oklahoma.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter how bad or how good they're doing. So they got to be ready. And then we mentioned it earlier, the other stud shout out, Georgia Tech's Haynes King. Incredible game. Put the game on his back, the team on his back. 23 for 30, 287 yards, 4 touchdowns. Did have 1 interception, and he even ran the ball 8 times for 90 yards. So just playing out of his mind right now. And again, I know Texas A&M is just hating themselves for letting him go.
Oh, yeah.
Because he is much more the mold that they want with Connor Weigman instead of Max Johnson. No offense to him. It's just not the same style that they're used to. But, yep, that wraps up our big game breakdowns. And after all that fun, now we get into the continued misery and continued debacles. That is the home state of South Carolina. I'll tell you what, it is just Palmetto State is not having a good year in football right now.
When you thought it couldn't get worse, it gets worse.
Yeah, absolutely. For South Carolina's end, I'll start it off against Texas A&M. Not shocked at the final score. They lost 30-17. But just as I've said, pretty much every time they've lost, and for much of the year, it's not so much the score line, it's the way that South Carolina is losing. It's probably just the most frustrating part. So, shockingly to me, and probably to a lot of people, I even texted you this, the first quarter for South Carolina was almost flawless. They came out on fire and ended the first quarter leading 7-0. Managed to get Texas A&M to have multiple 3-and-outs. Finished the first quarter with 3 sacks, and against Texas A&M's Max Johnson. And on offense, the drive that they scored on looked good. They were crisp, clicking the ball downfield. Nick Harbor was a big focal point of the game. Xavier Legette traveled with the team, was out there on many occasions, but it was just very obvious he was still banged up. They weren't really throwing to him very much until the very end of the game, when it was just kind of desperation. And I mean, he was slow. He wasn't himself. So it was obvious that Nick Harbor was the main target that Spencer Rattler was going after. He dropped his first pass, which would have been a first down. But then it was interesting and good to see that he went to him on the sidelines and said, "Hey, I'm coming right back to you. Like don't hang your head. You're gonna have a lot of catches." And sure enough, he finished the game as the leading receiver for South Carolina, and it was great to see like the kind of the future on display. After that first drop, I think he caught every other pass that was thrown his way. Finished the game 6 receptions, 59 yards, no touchdowns, but those are going to come. It's just they didn't have too many opportunities for touchdowns in that game. Texas A&M's defense, I talked about before the game, is the strong suit of that team. So it was always going to be more difficult to put points on them than it was trying to keep them off the board. But, Spencer Rattler finished the game 20 for 33, 176 yards, 1 touchdown. Again, the hampering part of the offense was the offensive line. And this was the 8th different configuration for the offensive line going into the game. And by the third quarter, I think it was a guard for South Carolina, got injured, and it was either guard or tackle. I can't remember which one it was. but it ended up being the number 12th offensive lineman that's gotten injured this season for South Carolina. Just utterly crazy, and definitely did not help Spencer Rattler whatsoever, or the running game. They even with the sacks that Spencer Rattler took, finished the game 33 yards total rushing. Mario Anderson, he had 72 yards before the subtraction of all the sack yardage. So he ran hard, he ran effective, just as he does every game, having to break tackles and whatnot. He and Nick Harbor were definitely the MVPs for South Carolina's offense. At their best, those two guys were the ones moving the ball for them. But yeah, the second quarter for South Carolina, it just felt like the wheels just came off. After that great first start, 7-0, going second quarter, like, okay, let's build on it. Quickly gets out of hand, and before you know it, you're going in halftime, 21-7, Texas A&M. It also didn't help that on 3 back-to-back drives, South Carolina's Spencer Rattler had intentional grounding calls. And looking back at it, I mean, it obviously first falls on the offensive line for just not giving him any time to throw. And I'd also, it's kind of one of those things, blame is equally spread to everybody. Blame on the offensive line, blame on Spencer Rattler, blame on the offensive coordinator. For every time that happened, there was never a check down option for Spencer Rattler to throw to. All of his passes, all of his receivers were like 20 yards down the field, 20, 30 yards. And so whenever he was getting rushed and everything, he had to throw it quick. And a lot of those times he was not out of the pocket as it was. And as he threw it, it just wasn't close enough to a receiver and drew the flag every time. So just frustrating because it just debilitated the offense in that second quarter. And I mean, Shane Beamer, Dowell Loggins, Spencer Rattler, they're all, very hard on themselves for it, wishing they could have done something different. At the same time, they knew that Texas A&M's defensive line was their best. So I think at one point, Spencer Rattler was just trying not to take a sack in the sense of fumbling the ball or anything. So just trying not to give away possessions in the close game. But yeah, other than that, just a game where it got out of hand and it just never really got back in South Carolina's favor. I think the fourth quarter, South Carolina was able to get it to 24-17. You're a one-score game. They had a chance to get back into it, and it was a fourth and I believe short. I think it was like 4th and 1. And South Carolina lines up in the shotgun with Mario Anderson next to him, and the worst snap of the entire game comes, and the ball gets snapped. It stays on the ground the whole time, and just debilitates that drive too. And so you have turnover on downs because of a bad snap, and I'm just like, why are we doing this to ourselves? It's just one of those
Right.
South Carolina shoot themselves in the foot moment where you didn't have a bad snap like that the entire game, and it comes at a crucial moment where the ball just didn't even leave the ground. So, yeah. But again, it's one of those things that I'm not surprised by the total score. It's just the way it happened. And truth be told, the defense played statistically their best game the entire season because the Texas A&M offense only amassed, I think, 350 yards of total offense, the second lowest total that they've allowed the entire season. So they only allowed 105 rushing against Texas A&M, 2.6 average per carry, 249 through the air. So the defense for South Carolina at least kept them in the game the entire time. It was just if it's just not one problem, it's another. And South Carolina's offensive line, as I feared, held them back in this game tremendously. And just the fact that we didn't really have any, besides Leggett not being in the game and just not being himself, we didn't really have any threats to throw to. Nick Harbor's still trying to learn how to be a receiver. There were several other freshmen that dropped the ball in obvious places where they should have caught it. So it was just, if it wasn't one thing, it was just another. And that's just kind of how it's summed up South Carolina season this year. If it's not one problem, it's another. So, they come back to home this next weekend, 4 home games in a row. They play Jacksonville State, also the Gamecocks. So that'll be funny. Gamecocks will win in that matchup, I guarantee it. But yeah, it's just like you talked about in another instance. It becomes a zero margin of error zone for South
Yeah.
Carolina. But yep. Other than that, I will. If you have any other thoughts on it, go for it. Other than that, we can go to NC State.
Yeah, man. These next 4 weeks, it's good for you guys because they're all at home, and obviously South Carolina.
Yeah,
I mean, for the most part, plays pretty well at home. I
far
would
better.
even argue, especially in November. Um,
Yeah,
I would almost argue these next 4 weeks are critical to the future of Shane Beamer. Obviously, I've said this. I still say this. He's not going to get fired in the offseason. His
no,
seat's not going to get hot, nothing like that. But
no,
if Beamer drops the next 4 and he don't go to a bowl game and you finish the season 2-10 in year 3 of his reign, there's definitely going to be at least, I think, a lot more pressure on him going
yeah,
into year 3. If you just at least, even if you don't make a bowl game, but let's say you pick up 2 of the next 4, let's say you beat Vanderbilt,
and Jacksonville
or
State.
let's say you drop one this week. Let's say you drop one, Jacksonville State, but let's say you at least beat Clemson and Vanderbilt. Uh, that might, I think, reignite a little fire in this fan base.
Yeah,
And I guess we could all probably say disagree with this. As long as if y'all lose the next 3 but beat Clemson, Beamer's fine. Beamer's gonna
yeah,
be fine.
yeah.
If you lose
That's
the
it's
next
always how
3,
it is.
yeah, or I'm sorry, if you win the next 3 but lose to Clemson, then they're going to hate Beamer again. So,
Yeah,
I
sour
think,
taste. Yeah,
yeah, if I was to choose one game out of these next 4 that is going to be, I think, the absolute most important one for South Carolina is going to be the Clemson game. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. Like, no one cares because obviously you're not playing for an SEC title game, you're not playing for the CFP playoffs, anything like that. At this point, state championship is all that matters for really the Clemson and South Carolina fan bases. So I think Shane Beamer, he can lose the next 3, but beat Clemson, and I think be okay in the offseason. But man, if y'all lose the next 4, there's going to be some very interesting discussions in the offseason.
oh yeah, agreed, agreed. Yeah, at this point, South Carolina Clemson's shaping up to be a battle of the worst against the worst in South Carolina's state. it's,
Yeah, that
it's
that game
it's
can
gonna
very easily
it's probably gonna
determine.
be yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's going to be a very probably sloppy and just bad, boring game. It's what it's shaping up to be.
yeah, that game has the potential to be who punches their ticket to the Birmingham Bowl in sometime in December or January, whatever that game is. The winner of Clemson Carolina is probably going to that bowl game. Um, but
Yeah,
we'll have to wait and see if we even get to that point.
yeah, we'll see. We shall see. Alrighty, so how are things in Tigerland?
Not good. Not good, in case you're curious. Not good at all. Again, this is a game where Clemson dominate. Oh, I think you can say dominated statistically, but they just it's like they keep digging to find a way. Okay, how can I lose this game? I don't want to win this game. I want to lose this game. So how can I
Yeah,
figure out how to lose this game? That's what they're doing. It seems like. I mean, it's wild. So Clemson, for example, had 20 first downs. NC State had 9. You look at the passing yards, or I'm sorry, look at the total yards for both these teams. 364 for Clemson. NC State only had 202. So the Clemson defense, again, I mean, they're not the defense that we are used to seeing in the college football playoff run that went for 6 years in a row. They're not up to that caliber, but they're at least good enough to win Clemson games if we had a competent offense. In which, in this case, we do not have a competent offense. In case anyone was still curious about if that's even the question or not. What I am most troubled by right now is, or I should say most troubled, but one of those things I'm troubled by is the play of Cade Klubnik. Like, this was the year that everyone was like, he's grown a lot in the offseason. I think there was even quotes being floated around the offseason saying he is taking steps where he is almost surpassing or is surpassing where Deshaun Watson was at this point in his Clemson career and all that, which is a very big statement to make considering what Deshaun Watson accomplished. I think we
yeah,
can all agree that Cade is not even close to what Deshaun Watson was his sophomore season. Not even close to what Trevor Lawrence was.
No,
Just he has really, really regressed majorly these last few weeks. I'm not sure why. I gotta answer that question, but it's just been he has played very poor football. I mean, he threw 2 picks yesterday, had no touchdowns. I mean, just overall bad play. Something that kind of stuck out to me a little bit is Tyler Brown, for example, freshman receiver from Greenville. He had a phenomenal start to this year. I mean, as a true freshman, was starting to really get in the
yeah,
slide. He slid to the starting role after Antonio Williams went down, and really took the reins. Really did well. Well, I've noticed that his name has not been talked about a lot in the last couple of weeks. You look at his numbers for
yeah.
yesterday. He had 3 catches for 6 yards. I mean, it was just he has fallen off. But then you look at Jake Brittingstool, tight end. He has really stepped up big for Clemson. He had 8 catches yesterday for 93 yards. Bo
He's
Collins stepped
consistent.
up a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Brittingstool has been a very
he's the
consistent target.
consistent, the only really the most consistent vertical threat that Clemson has right now, which
Exactly.
is nice that he's come on. It's just that he's come on and then everyone else has like disappeared, and it's like
Right.
it shouldn't we shouldn't have that. So
Exactly. Exactly. I
yeah,
mean, it's just Brittingstool has been kind of a one man show the last couple of weeks. Obviously, he had a record breaking game at Miami, and then he continued that momentum into Raleigh this past week.
yeah,
Didn't score touchdowns, but was a very sure handed guy. He made some pretty good catches bailing out Cade Klubnik a few times yesterday. And then running the football, obviously, Will Shipley got hurt. I believe it was the second quarter, maybe early second or late first quarter. He went down with the injury. They don't know what the status is
yeah,
for him. He finished the game with 6 carries, 21 yards. Phil Maffa, they obviously had to lean into him as being RB1 the rest of the game, and he took advantage of it. I mean, he finished 16 carries, 84 yards, picked up 5 yards a carry, and had 2 scores. Something that I was kind of still like troubled by. Like, why are we not giving these freshman running backs or underclassmen running backs a chance?
yeah,
To me, this kind of was like they can't be that bad to where they can't see the field at all. Like, just give some
yeah,
sort of because the offense is I feel like is just so vanilla right now, and it has been the last 3 years, being completely honest. And
yeah,
so just kind of I feel like a nice little change of pace or change of tempo, maybe a little speed out there to maybe provide some explosive plays to help ignite this offense, and we just didn't see that yesterday. But I don't know, man. I think there are some troubling things going around this not fan base, the program right now. There were some comments made by my understanding, by some players after the game that are. I mean, there's no question they're all very frustrated. I mean, I would be too. I
yeah,
mean, there were some players that were widely quoted saying we should not be 4-4. We're not a 4-4 team. We can't really put together why we're 4-4. We're having great weeks of practices, and we get hyped up for the game, thinking everything's going great all week, and then we get to Saturday and everything just falls apart. I talked about this last week, whereas like we talk all week of being like everything's fine, everything's good, pumping sunshine, and then you get to Saturday and the product is just black and the product is bad and you get a bad
yeah,
result, and that gets exhausting after a while. What I'm afraid of with this Clemson team now is, you know, are they going to keep pushing forward at this point? Are they going to stay motivated for the season? By what I've heard, that people, the fans at the game yesterday in Raleigh, there were some strong indicators showing that there's a lot of players that are kind of checked out. A lot of players that are kind of checked out. A lot that are kind of like, at this point, what are we really playing for? Like there's no ACC title game, obviously no playoffs. We're fighting for a bowl game. Which at that point, they're like, what am I willing to give for that? And so that's
yeah,
trouble. That's very troubling. So I don't know, man. Again, I said this last week, and I'll say it again. I'm not going to be a dead horse, but you got to get in the same sheet music and put some wins together, because this next month of November for Clemson is arguably, I would say, the hardest month of November they have had in the last few years. I mean, they got Notre Dame this week. They
oh
got Georgia Tech, who is looking better than we expected, and they host North Carolina and then go to
yes.
South Carolina. So I don't know. These next 4 weeks are going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that, like we said, Georgia Tech's hitting their stride, especially offensively. That doesn't bode well for Clemson. And then Notre Dame just ran Pittsburgh out of the
Yeah.
stadium,
Yeah.
scoring 58 against them. So, yeah, it's just not looking good. I guess the only bright side for Clemson is the fact they play well when they're at home, just like South Carolina does. They do
Yep.
not play well on the road, so you're hoping that maybe some luck is going to go back to Clemson's side in the home games. But yeah, for both teams, very crucial next 4 games, and it's no margin of error, and it just sucks because we're having to put it all on the line and be
Right.
on cardiac arrest and for these next few games. But yeah, you talked about it with like the freshmen and stuff just not being ready. I know a lot of South Carolina fans have said that about wide receivers and stuff for South Carolina. They're like, why don't we have more freshman wide receivers out there playing and everything? And then against this Texas A&M, I saw I think like 3 drops by 3 different freshman wide receivers. I'm like, oh, that's why. Like, they can't
That
catch.
explains
There you
that.
go. That's why. But yeah, I mean, it's just frustrating. But and at the same time, I know too a lot of coaches they want to try to hold on to red shirts for certain players. I know. Speaking of red shirts, South Carolina dismissed a freshman defensive lineman
Hold on.
that was a highly rated interior defensive line for South Carolina, and there was just no explanation really, and a lot of people dove into it more and like try to found out why. And according to insiders, basically the guy was asked, basically said like we're going on the road to Missouri. We're going to be kind of thin at the defensive tackle spot. We're going to need you to play. Unfortunately, you're going to have to burn your red shirt. But I mean, at least we'll get you to play in these other games the rest of the stretch. And he did not want to play. He said he wanted to hold on to the red shirt, and basically said that his parents felt the same way, and he refused to travel. And whenever Shane Beamer got back, he said, "All right, bye."
Wow.
And he said, "You're not going to put yourself on the line for the team to help the team. You just want to care
Right.
about yourself, then bye." So it's real unfortunate that it came to that, but yeah, just it sucks. So it's just one of those things that both teams are having to really turn to some young players to get some sparks right now to get something going. But yeah, we'll transition to our last home team debacle. Citadel lost to Samford, 37-7. And yeah, I assume Adam that you did not make the trip to the locker
I'm
room
not.
to pump the guys up
I'm
because
not.
that's the final result.
They
So
didn't invite me.
uh, yeah, no, that's
It was
it's
very
all
rude
right.
of them.
They put the loss on themselves. It's all right.
I tried. I did what I could.
Try to Skype in or something, Zoom call. Oh man. Alrighty, but yeah, they're just not a good football team. Hopefully, again, they can beat Wofford, but we'll
Yep.
just have to see. Have to wait and see.
1-11,
But yep,
baby.
that should wrap up. Our part 1 post game analysis for week 9, and we will have part 2 previewing week 10 and a glorious slate of games
Glorious.
for this coming weekend. And yeah, real excited about that. Real excited about that one. But yeah, if you want to remind our good followers out there of where they can listen to more content and about the 5 stars, our rating for Spotify, that's always good.
Yep. We're on Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, and the old Twitter, and YouTube. So feel free to go follow on those pages. Keep up with our content and all that. And if you can, give us 5 stars on Spotify. That'd be glorious of you.
Yep. Really helps us out. Like I said, it helps us on being compared to other podcasts and helps us pop up faster for sports related podcasts whenever people search it and everything. But yep, we love doing this for y'all. Love putting the content out and everything. We have a blast doing it. But yeah, even though the season's not going well for our home teams, we are right here for all of it. every
Through
moment.
thick and
So
thin.
thick and thin. That's right. Alrighty. Well, y'all take care and have a good week, and catch us again for part 2 later this week.
Y'all have a good one.